My husband is the strongest alpha in the empire. Our pheromone match is as high as 93%. Everyone says that we are a perfect match made in heaven. He once swore that his love for me had nothing to do with pheromones and that he would be loyal to me all his life. But later, he fell in love with the rebel leader who was a 99% match. They played cat and mouse games during the day, but made love with each other at night. He tortured and framed me, and even regretted why I didn't die in the fire instead of his lover. Brian, pheromone compatibility really doesn't lie to me. Anthony, you don't deserve my love at all. Later he gave up everything just to see me again, but I no longer wanted him. 01. After the rhythm was over, my husband Brian immediately got up and rushed into the bathroom to wash. For Kevin, every time he has sex with his wife, it feels like doing a boring and dirty physical labor. I lay quietly in bed, trying to slow down my breathing to make my aching body feel more comfortable. The explosion 2 years ago caused me to lose my glands, and since then doing this with him has been like going through torture. This should have been a happy thing, but neither he nor I got any pleasure from it. We were close friends, lovers, and husband and wife, and we are still an enviable match made in heaven. He promised to be faithful to me forever, but after only 3 years of marriage, he fell in love with a younger lover who was more compatible with him. And I, who had lost my glands and could no longer release pheromones that excited him, became the garbage he wanted to throw away but couldn't. He used to hate alphas who were controlled by pheromones the most, saying that they were no different from animals in heat. He vowed to become the ruler of the empire and change the rules that determined mates based on pheromone matching. At that time, his eyes were bright, like a blooming galaxy, giving me the illusion that as long as I followed him, I could achieve my wish and reach the other side of my expectations. I was lost in my memories, reaching out to grasp the stars floating in the sky, but the ambient light only gave me empty shadows. The window was closed, but I felt cold and shrank into a shivering state. The sound of water in the bathroom stopped and Brian came out. He had a date and would not stay long. I should get up, help him get dressed, and see him out respectfully. But today I really didn't have the energy to deal with it, so I pretended to fall asleep. Brian waited for a minute, thinking I was taking Joe, and deliberately called the maid loudly. Although I have done everything for him myself in the 5 years of our marriage, I am still no match for the nanny who has taken care of him for more than 10 years. Brian is an S-level alpha with a handsome face, wearing a black casual suit with broad shoulders and a narrow waist, and exuding an abstinence temptation that is irresistible. Brian was very satisfied with the outfit his aunt chose for him. He left the house happily and couldn't wait to go to his date. He is a guardian of the empire, but he falls in love with the empire rebel Kevin. The high-profile empire-wanted criminal, who never shows his true face, makes Brian crazy about him. The two people played the cat and mouse game of chasing each other during the day, but they overlapped and cuddled together at night. Brian once secretly tested the pheromones of the two of them, and the pheromone matching degree between him and Kevin was as high as 99%, which was 6% higher than that between Brian and me. The two met during a capture operation. Although Kevin was an Omega, he was not afraid of the pressure from the Alpha. Brian was shocked by the cold light in his eyes. The most outstanding and ruthless guardian of the Empire was so obsessed with lust that he could not move and just let him escape. Brian, who failed in the mission, didn't tell me about it. He hugged me as if he was lost because of his first failure. Brian secretly resisted on his own. He was confident that he loved me and would never succumb to desire like an animal. But when he thought he had let Kevin die in the fire to save me, he wanted to kill me on the spot. My husband mistook the person in the thick smoke and regretted why he saved me instead of Kevin. We have known each other for 15 years, been in love for 5 years, and have been married for 3 years. He wants to use my life to exchange for the life of his beloved. My glands were damaged and 75% of my body was burned. Brian did not allow the doctor to give me anesthesia, and I was in excruciating pain every day. When the damaged glands were removed, it was more like having my head peeled open and a sharp scalpel stabbed into my soul. No wonder the Empire banned gland removal surgery. It would really be extremely painful. 03. While I was being tortured in the hospital, Brian took me to court. Not only did he want to dissolve my marriage, he also pinned the blame for Kevin's explosion at the mutant press conference on me in an attempt to ruin my reputation. Not only does he want to torture me, he also wants me to die socially. Finally, Brian's father stepped in to calm the situation, and Kevin reappeared alive, and Brian let me go. He dropped the divorce proceedings, not because he still had feelings for me, but because of Kevin. Kevin told Brian that he liked this sneaky feeling. He loved looking at the marked omegas, and he felt a transcendent pleasure when he saw his alpha sleeping with another omega in despair. Kevin is like a witch, and Brian enjoys it. The communicator made a ding-dong sound and a photo popped up. The floor was a mess, the mattress was askew, the sheets were torn, and it seemed that even the air molecules were stained with the hot and ambiguous decadence. Great. Thank you. 5 words popped up, followed by a red envelope. I clicked to receive it, like a skilled pimp. Steven took my phone and threw it on the sofa. Don't look at it, it's dirty. He is Brian's half-brother. Brian's parents got together because of their high pheromone matching. But after Brian was born, Lee's father found an omega with a higher pheromone matching with him, and he spent every day with his new lover. Brian's mother was trapped in the Lee family. Like a flower without sunlight, she withered and died early. Brian once hated his father, but now he is very much like his father, no, even more so than his father. Why let him humiliate you like this? Your glands are damaged and Brian's mark is invalid. Can't I take you away from here? Steven rubbed my neck like a big cat acting coquettishly. The smell of fruit wine was growing stronger in the air. It was useless for me to remind him that my glands were gone, and my sensitivity to alpha's pheromones was now even worse than beta's. His charm towards me was like talking to a deaf person. Steven murmured in grievance, I like you, it has nothing to do with pheromones. Brian also said the same thing. 04. The next morning, I was called to the ancestral home by my grandfather, and the family doctor performed a series of examinations on me with a cold face. As the cold instrument was inserted into my body, I thought of the ewes that were confined for breeding. But the ewes have animal associations to speak up for them, while I have no dignity either, but no one cares. After the examination, the doctor walked over to Brian's father and whispered to him. Brian's father stared at me like a hawk and suddenly overturned the table. Why can't you get pregnant even though everything is normal? You bitch, don't you want to have a baby? I was escorted to him by the bodyguards, and Brian's father hit me in the face with his cane. The smell of blood filled my mouth. I had a lecture in the afternoon, so I had to put on makeup. Even though I am a senior engineer and one of the leaders of the Empire's scientific research projects, in the eyes of Brian's father, I am just a ewe who must reproduce offspring. 05. The injuries on my face shocked my colleagues. Oh my God, Chief, how did you get injured? I made up an excuse to get away with it. Tisk, TV, you fell like this, Brian must be heartbroken. Their understanding of the relationship between Brian and I is still stuck at the time 2 years ago when we were most in love. I smiled dryly, not knowing how to answer. Someone asked me enviously what surprise Brian would give me this time. I forced a smile and said that Brian was very busy recently and would not attend my lecture. They have been estranged from each other for a long time, but they still have to pretend to be in love. I don't know how long my acting skills can last. Even if I didn't care about Brian, I wouldn't dare disobey Brian's father. If I angered him, he would dismember me without hesitation and then keep my sperm in a petri dish to continue breeding. Just like he did to my parents. 06. My parents are mutants bred in a laboratory. They had animal DNA mixed in. They are wolf omega and rabbit omega respectively. A wolf and a rabbit, an omega and an omega, a forbidden union. Brian's father thought that I, who had a 1 in 10 million chance of being born, could give birth to super strong offspring. My name is fake, my identity is fake, and I am more empty than the stars in the ambient light. After applying a thick layer of foundation, my speech ended perfectly. The air is getting worse and worse. The central air purification device developed by my team, once built, will be able to deliver clean air to every corner of the Empire in an instant. The applause lasted for a long time. When it came to the question and answer session, someone asked me directly where Brian was and why he didn't attend my lecture. Everyone in the Empire knows that I put all my efforts into the central air purification unit, but my husband didn't even show his face at this important moment. Mr. Anthony, do you mean by not answering? The Imperial Executive Officer is fighting fiercely with the leader of the rebel army. After these words were spoken, the whole place fell silent. Brian and Kevin's affair had been hidden very well, so how could it be known? Almost subconsciously, I looked up at the skylight. There was a silver figure there, and the eyes revealed under the mask were smiling at me provocatively. Mr. Anthony, please answer my question. Are you fooling the public by portraying a loving couple? The reporters were so aggressive that I felt like my fig leaf had been torn off and I was exposed naked in front of everyone. My brother is too busy, so he asked me to bring flowers to my sister-in-law. Stephen walked towards me step by step, holding a large bunch of sunflowers. Unlike Brian, his smile seemed to be soaked in sunshine, and he was as handsome as the sunflowers in his hands. He placed the flower in my arms and gave me a light kiss on the cheek. Don't be afraid, the prince is here to save you. 07. Stephen turned to the reporter with a cold expression. This is a scientific research lecture. You are interviewing with such a gossipy mentality. I really question your professionalism. Brian's father will hold you accountable for your improper negligence. The reporter was frightened and pale and apologized hastily. Stephen really was like the hero in a romance novel, swooping down from the sky to solve everything. After getting into the car, Stephen ordered his men to investigate the matter of the rude reporter. His expression was grim as he gave the order. Brian is in charge of the Lee family's public affairs, while Stephen takes care of all the dirty work of the Lee family. I sighed. No need to check, it was Kevin who ordered it, I saw him on the skylight. Stephen sat up suddenly. Why didn't you tell me just now? Will it be useful if I tell you? I smiled bitterly. Brian would not watch Kevin get caught. Kevin had this kind of confidence that allowed him to show up so blatantly. Leave him, Anthony. Really, I don't want to see you being humiliated anymore. Stephen looked deeply at me sitting in the passenger seat. You want my child too, right? I turned to Stephen calmly. His sunny smile froze on his face, and a flash of guilt passed away. Brian's father wants my child. Stephen wants to fight for power in the Lee family. Love does not exist. 08. Stephen took a breath and smiled nonchalantly. Since you understand, then consider it. Wouldn't it be good to cooperate with me? At least I will treat you as a precious vase, and won't abandon you like my brother. Besides, without a child, your life will be in danger, right? Yes. When Brian's father's patience runs out, that's when I die. I held my seatbelt tightly and lowered my head. Let's go back, it's late. Stephen suddenly stepped on the accelerator and brought me to the edge of the imperial capital. The air here is turbid and gray, harboring all the filth and sin of the empire, and is called the Imperial Sewer. Brian, wearing a gray Lord Windbreaker, embraced the slim and charming beauty. The two held hands and played, and then had a fierce kiss. I couldn't bear it anymore and turned around to dry heave. I was called to Brian's father's place without eating anything in the morning, and now I could only vomit acid. Brian is going to sleep with Kevin. Are you still going to stay faithful to him? Why don't we get revenge on this nasty guy together? Stephen's voice was like the whisper of a demon. Dirty! I covered my mouth, pushed Stephen away, and stumbled into the alley. On a giant abandoned display screen, I suddenly saw Brian's face appear on the screen. As a teenager, Brian's facial lines were still as soft as warm wind. He told me confidently, Anthony, I will definitely change this era so that everyone will no longer be controlled by pheromones like animals. Suddenly he smiled. After you are marked, you will belong to me only. I will be loyal to you for the rest of my life. I reached out and touched the back of my neck, where only 2 intersecting scars were left, like a cross, warning me of my past mistakes. Anthony, you are my best friend and my lover. I love you, not because of pheromones, but because you are you. Brian's face was distorted and he spoke words of love to me affectionately. At that time, he was already involved with Kevin, and his comments before the media were so hypocritical that anyone could see through them at a glance. You despicable liar. I picked up the rubble on the ground and smashed it hard. The moment the fluorescent screen touched the stone, it exploded and a huge fireball fell from the sky. I watched in fear, unable to avoid it, but a pair of arms protected me and wrapped me in their arms. I had a dream that I turned into an air molecule and floated away freely with the wind. I even dreamed of my parents, who were hybrids, mutants, and omegas. They were weak, but they risked their lives to be together. But just when we were about to be free, we were discovered by the old man of the Lee family. He dismembered them and took me away from my mother. I grew up in the incubator, accompanied by the memories of my parents. They didn't protect me, but they taught me to follow my heart. I saw my parents smiling at me. They were holding hands and leaving the dark cage that had imprisoned them for decades. They were free. 09. I was woken up by the sound of Brian's father arguing with Brian. Brian's father rapped his cane. You bastard! You're still trying to cover up for that wanted criminal. If we hadn't tracked you down, how could the experimental base be found? Do you know how important the experimental subjects were destroyed by the explosion at the base? That's impossible. Kevin promised that he would never participate in the rebellion again. He was with me at the time. I think Anthony staged the explosion himself. At this time, Brian did not forget to pass the blame to me. Brian's father pointed at me with contempt. Anthony planned it? He planned to blow himself up half of his life? A 3-year-old child wouldn't make such a judgment. Father, Kevin and I have a 99% pheromone match. He loves me and would never lie to me. Brian angrily defended his relationship with his mistress. The rebel organization just happened to announce in a high-profile manner that it was responsible for the bombing, making Brian look like a clown. Brian, I don't think you have been brainwashed by that wanted criminal. You are just like your inferior parents, born idiots. I am very disappointed in you. I will give you 3 Kevins time. If Anthony can't get pregnant with your child, there is no need for you to occupy this position anymore. Brian's father stormed off. Brian angrily kicked down the life support equipment in the ward and pulled me up. Why do you always appear near Kevin by coincidence? What are you thinking? Anthony, you really make me sick. He roared like a helpless and desperate beast. I let the skin graft, which had not yet fully grown, fall off, revealing the blood and flesh that stained his hand red. Brian hurriedly let go of me and took a big step back, looking at his bloody hands as if he had suddenly woken up. I pressed the bell to call the nurse and told her about my condition so that she could arrange for a suitable doctor as quickly as possible. I was once spoiled by Brian and became a cripple with 0 life skills. But fortunately, it only took Kevin time for me to learn everything with my bruised and battered body. Brian looked at me. I don't know, you're so badly injured. What? Does he still feel guilty towards me now? There is no one here. Why is he pretending to be affectionate? I interrupted him impatiently. Have you calmed down? Or can you ask the doctor not to use anesthesia on me? But this time, I won't be stupid enough to let myself suffer. That was a misunderstanding. I thought Kevin was dead. Don't you understand? Brian was very annoyed. Misunderstanding? Because of Brian's misunderstanding, I, the one between the 2 Kevins, suffered the torture of being cut into pieces almost every day. Even the doctor who cleaned my wounds said that even if it was revenge for my father's murder, he would not do it to this extent. Now Brian wants to brush it off with a simple misunderstanding? Even though I know that the boy in my memory has long since changed beyond all recognition, I am still a little disappointed, but only a little bit. Brian seemed to be stimulated by something. He suddenly stepped forward, pinched my chin, and forced me to look up at him. Anthony, don't pretend to be pitiful and innocent. When you pretended to be Kevin to trick me into saving you during the explosion, you no longer have the right to stand by my side. You were the one who betrayed my feelings first. It was obvious that he himself could not control the temptation of pheromones, but he turned around and put the blame on me. I wanted to laugh, but when I opened my mouth, the mockery turned into a sigh. If I knew at that time that it wasn't me you wanted to save, I wouldn't have held your hand even if I died. Brian's eyes dodged for a moment, and then he showed a mocking look. My father loves you so much, how could he let you die? Anthony, your pretentious behavior really disgusts me. Unappetizing, nauseating, without glands like a castrated dog. In the past 2 years, I have enriched my vicious vocabulary thanks to Brian. I have heard it so many times that I don't even feel anything now. I lay back on the bed weakly, and Brian still stood there. By the way, Brian's father asked him to have a child with me among the 3 Kevins. I didn't bother to look at him. If you want to have a baby, wait a few days. I really can't cooperate now. Anthony, in your eyes, am I just a stud who doesn't care about your life or death just for the sake of power? The stud at least has some use. Brian does nothing but make me uncomfortable and upset. I turned my back to him and ignored him. Brian paused, then pushed the door open and left angrily. I watched him disappear completely at the end of the street from the window. Then I got out of bed and grabbed the nurse to ask about the location of Stephen's ward. Stephen was in the intensive care unit, wrapped like a mummy. He protected me at the moment of the explosion. I stayed with him for 3 days before Stephen regained consciousness. When he opened his eyes and saw me, he teased, "You came to your lover's ward so blatantly, and Brian didn't care?" Brian hasn't come back since he left last time. He is chasing Kevin for an explanation and has no time to catch the adulterer for the time being. Anthony, don't you find it strange that I would risk my life to protect you? Stephen laughed at himself. Although Stephen is the child of Li Fu and true love, Li Fu only loves true love, and Stephen is not even as good as the pet dog raised by his parents. Stephen had been very careful and cautious over the years, but when the explosion happened, he risked his life to protect me. Anthony, you don't have omega glands. I'm not bewitched by your pheromones. I think I really love you. 11. I looked at him, speechless. Brian once thought he really loved me. The message from the communicator broke the silence between us. The video of Brian and Kevin popped up. They were arguing and kissing about the explosion at the experimental base, and they were entwining and biting each other like 2 wild beasts in a state of lust. The background was Brian and I's bed. In the past 2 years, at Kevin's request, Brian has taken him to our school, to the Ferris wheel where we made wishes, to exhibitions of artists I like, and to our favorite roadside stalls. Finally, the last place that belonged to Brian and me was also invaded by him and Kevin. They won a great victory, and I suffered a crushing defeat. Stephen's face was grim. How long has it been since he sent this to you? 2 years, right? You just let him provoke you like this. I did it to make myself give up. When I was 8 years old, Brian brought me back to the Lee family from a laboratory that never saw the light of day. He was like a beam of light that illuminated my dark life. Of course, I had to witness the destruction of the good old days. So, have you given up on him now? Stephen hooked my little finger and asked in a coquettish manner. Then can I kiss you? Stephen had already taken action when he asked, but before he could touch me, he was knocked to the ground. Brian glared at us fiercely. He released a powerful pressure, causing Stephen to be in so much pain that he could not move and bit his lips until they bled. Brian stepped on Stephen's fingers and said condescendingly, "Bastard! Have I ever told you that I would rather destroy my things than give them to you?" Because of Brian's pressure, blood gushed out of Stephen's mouth and nose, dripping onto the ground. Although he is also an alpha, he is powerless against an S-level warrior like Brian. "You're crazy!" I pushed Brian away and stood in front of Stephen. Brian sneered and threw something in my face. It was a photo of me and Stephen taking me to the Imperial Sewer. The angle was used to make the photo look very ambiguous. "Nothing to say?" Brian demanded. I shook my head. "No. Isn't this evidence enough for you to file a lawsuit for a forced divorce?" Brian was blank for a moment, then he laughed cruelly. "Divorce? You're dreaming." Brian took me back to our place, and the tender young man in my pajamas threw himself into my partner's arms with eyes full of joy. Following behind the boy was Brian's father's family doctor. It turns out that he is Brian's man, so he humiliates me so rudely every time. Brian protected the boy and complained lovingly, "Be careful, kid." Children? It turns out they even have children. No wonder they need to call a doctor. Seeing me staring at the boy's belly in a daze, he shrank back and hid in Brian's arms. Brian shielded him, glaring at me warily. "Is this your Kevin?" I glanced at the boy and raised my eyebrows in question. The legendary Kevin defeated 5 adult alphas in order to save and violated Omega, but the frail boy looked like he had difficulty even running 2 fast steps. Is it a rumor that the goods are not what they claim to be, or is it that someone is blind? Maybe my sarcastic expression was too obvious. Brian's face became even uglier. The young man put his hands on his hips and walked forward shyly. "Who do you think you are? How dare you say that to me? I was ignorant before, so I was foolish and wanted to rebel. Now I'm pregnant with Ajin's child. If you know what's good for you, you should pack up your things and get out." The boy gestured as he spoke, looking like a prostitute trying to steal business in the Imperial sewer. Brian pinched his brows and said, "Kevin, please stop talking for now. What's wrong? Are you still in love with this castrated guy? Then I'm leaving." As the boy said this, he twisted his body and tried to leave. His belly bulged from side to side, which made Brian very worried. Brian compromised and domineeringly picked him up as a princess. "I don't love him, not at all. I only love you, little darling." The young man burst into laughter and said, "You are smart." I sat there leisurely, watching their disgusting interaction with little interest. Seeing how calm I was, the boy said to Brian in a long tone, "Tell him to get out. I feel sick just by looking at him." Brian tapped the boy's nose and said, "I'll have him move to the servants' room on the first floor. You won't have to see him anymore." The boy continued to make trouble, and a trace of impatience gathered between Brian's brows. "Don't get me wrong," I explained to Kevin. "Brian kept me just to make your child legitimate. Brian's father gave Brian 3 Kevins to make me pregnant. His lover was pregnant at this time, so he could pretend that the baby was mine. He could use this child to maintain his position and live happily with his lover and the family of 3. It was like killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Perhaps I saw through his plan. Brian's face darkened. He asked his lover to go upstairs, but the lover was very smart and ran away quickly. Brian sneered, "Brian? Should I call you husband in front of your lover?" Brian thought about it, but couldn't find where I was wrong, so he could only say impatiently, "You'd better think it through." But I don't intend to cooperate with Brian. "Oh, what do you think you can do?" Brian raised his eyebrows with a fierce expression. I smiled at him and said, "I can still do something about your father. Although it is very limited, it is enough to make Brian's lover suffer a little." Brian looked at me, his expression suddenly clear, but he shook his head. "Just tell me your conditions. I need funding from the Lee family for the Central Air Purification Project. Even if you don't tell me about this, the Lee family will. Completed within 3 Kevin days and put into use." Brian frowned. "So anxious?" "I am very anxious." Okay." I breathed a sigh of relief. "Your work really is above everything else." Brian gritted his teeth and stood up to leave. I called him again. "What else?" "After your lover's child is born, we will divorce." Brian's breathing stagnated for a moment, and he laughed and mocked. "Playing hard to get? Anthony, without glands, you are like a castrated dog. Do you think Steven really wants you?" "You don't have to worry about that, Brian. If you're not satisfied, it's the same if you file for divorce." Brian clenched his fists, turned around, kicked over the table and went upstairs. After a while, Brian's lover threw all my things down from the upstairs. The wedding photo was smashed in front of me, personal belongings were thrown everywhere, and Brian stood aside with a sullen face, supporting his lover. My lover looked at me smugly from upstairs and I walked past him expressionlessly. Useless garbage, what's the point of caring about it? I thought I could get through the 3 Kevins in peace, but Brian's little lover came to cause trouble for me. I grabbed his arm to prevent him from pretending to fall and blaming others. "You just want to abort the baby. There's no need to take such a risk. What if you really get hurt?" "You, what nonsense are you talking about? I know your child is not Brian's. I have a way that can not only deal with this trouble, but also make him feel guilty about you for the rest of his life. Why are you helping me?" I want to divorce him. The young lover suddenly realized, you are really together with Steven. Me, Brian has been taking inhibitors these days. That was all I had to say. 15. That night, Brian's inhibitors failed and he acted like a wild beast, sending his lover to the hospital. I got up and had breakfast, and Brian was sitting slumped on the sofa. I cursed inwardly that it was bad luck and turned to leave, but he spoke, his voice full of fatigue. Kevin's child is gone. He had always looked down on alphas who couldn't control their sexual desires, but now he had done the same thing and killed his and his lover's child. He must be disgusted with himself now. But what does this have to do with me? I pretended not to hear and quickened my pace. Brian grabbed my arm and growled, I said my baby is gone. I could only perfunctorily respond, it's so sad. My condolences. Brian and his wife are still young and they will have another child soon. Anthony, I'm really sad right now, can't you see? Even if we're not husband and wife, we're still friends. Brian, you're kidding. How come we are friends? I imitated him and laughed sarcastically. Who would torture their friends with the torture of 1,000 cuts? Brian and I haven't even been friends for a long time. Brian used his temper to cover up his guilt. I told you. It was a misunderstanding. Why do you have to keep harping on it? Then Brian, just think that I am a petty person and not worthy of being your friend. Brian suddenly flew into a rage. Not only can you not please others, but you also make me angry. You are gifted. Kevin's child is gone, so you have to give birth to mine. Brian dragged me upstairs and threw me on the bed. I let him do whatever he wanted without any expression on my face. I was used to it anyway. Although the strange smell on the bedding made me feel sick. This time he was not so rough. Instead, he rubbed my neck like he did when we were still in love, but I was unable to respond to his omega pheromones. Brian was stunned when he saw the cross on the back of my neck. His mark had been removed along with my glands. Then, Brian bit my skin fiercely in revenge, but I still didn't react. Brian, who was helpless and furious, smashed everything and ran out of the house. He stayed with his lover in the hospital for 3 days before returning. It's just that both of them had strange expressions. Brian even seemed unfamiliar and impatient with his lover. I didn't want to be a part of their relationship, so I went back to my room with my computer. The construction of the central air purification unit has already started. Based on the progress made in the past 3 days, it may be completed ahead of schedule. This is a people-benefiting project with huge investment, and it has also won the Lee family a lot of goodwill. A message popped up on the communicator. Do you have any potion that can make Brian fall in love? I will pay 10 times the price for it. Urgent. 16. It turned out that the pheromone potion had run out. No wonder Brian's relationship with his lover had grown distant. Thinking of my lover's arrogant look, I decided to ignore and torture him for the time being. Brian opened the door and came in, holding ointment in his hand. I calmly closed the dialog box, looked up and asked him what was the matter, but I was too lazy to say anything. I hurt you. Brian shook the ointment awkwardly. His hidden shyness made me feel as if I saw him in his school days. No need, it's just a skin wound and it will heal long ago. I lowered my head and continued to work. After 3 days, the scabs fell off. You should apply some medicine. I've already bitten it, and you're not the one who's most afraid of pain. I'm used to this little pain. Don't worry about it, Brian. I was too lazy to even raise my head. The more pain there was, the more bearable it became. Brian wanted to say something, but was driven away by his lover's scream. Before leaving, he threw the ointment to me and told me to remember to apply it. I didn't take it and the ointment fell to the ground. I picked it up and threw it out of the window. Why do you always give me useless garbage? I replied to Brian's lover with an okay, emoticon, and the pheromone potion was delivered that night. Brian and his little lover made a lot of noise in the middle of the night, which was a headache for everyone. His warmth was like a drop of warm water falling into an ice cave and disappearing without a trace. I stayed up late into the night to read the book, wanting to turn to the ending but not wanting to. I went out to get some water, and Brian, who was sitting on the sofa in the dark living room, suddenly spoke, which scared me. Brian's face still had the afterglow of satisfaction from the passion, and his chest and neck were covered with kiss marks that were too embarrassing to look at directly. I poured the water and wanted to leave, but he pulled me back. Kevin and I have a good compatibility, but… Congratulations, Brian, on finding true love. But I always feel empty after I finish. I suppressed the sarcasm in my heart. You two are so compatible. Doesn't it mean you are a perfect match? What are you afraid of? Brian looked at me and nodded as if he suddenly understood something. Yes, we are 99% compatible. We are a match made in heaven. I choked on the water and started coughing. Brian wanted to pat me on the back, but I dodged him and said, just do what you've decided to do. Don't have any regrets. Kevin and I are a perfect match, so why should I be confused? It's really a waste of time. Thank you, Anthony, for always helping me find the direction when I'm confused. As long as you're happy. I smiled and prepared to turn around and go back to my room. Brian shouted at me, Anthony, even if we get divorced, we are still close friends for more than 10 years. Let's put the misunderstandings in the past behind us. After the divorce, you can continue to live here. I waved to him without turning back. It was a goodbye this time, but I won't have to do it next time. I went back to the room and used half a pack of disinfectant wipes to wipe the places he touched. The dirt really made me uncomfortable. Brian marked his lover that night, and the two of them stuck together all day long, wishing they could melt into each other's bones and blood. The servants looked at me with a mixture of contempt and sympathy, but I was too lazy to pay attention to them. Every day, my colleagues and I were busy with the Central Air Purification Plant project. The blood stained the crystal table where I was working, and a tiny bud appeared on my fingertips. Time was running out. Steven suddenly exposed the intimate video of Brian and his lover. Every time Kevin appeared in the public eye, he wore a specific silver costume, hanging on his lover's waist and swinging, full of charm. The executor who maintained the security of the empire was actually mixed up with the rebel leader. The people were skeptical and the top leaders were extremely angry. Kevin's rebel army carried out many bomb attacks against high-level officials, sabotaged mutant exhibitions, blew up experimental bases, and destroyed human trafficking dens. The top leaders even suspected that the entire Lee family was involved with the rebel organization. Brian's furious father arrested Brian, and the Central Air Purification Project was also stopped. 1 or 2 always ruin my plans. 17. Brian's lover was eager to save the man, but was powerless to do anything. I asked him to apologize publicly as Kevin. He stayed up late to write a poignant love story about mortal enemies who loved and hated each other, and let his lover confess his youth and ignorance as Kevin. Brian became a brave man who dared to pursue love, which somewhat saved his image. At least the Central Air Purification System project could continue. Of course, there were people who didn't buy it. My friends, colleagues, and students were all indignant and stood up for me. I just urged them to work hard and ensure that they don't suffer any loss. Okay, when our project is finished, kick him. Let's go skiing together. Everyone was thinking about the wonderful vacation and continued to work with high morale. Brian was released, but I heard that Steven has officially returned to his ancestral home. Compared to the aloof Brian, Steven, who is flexible, is more pleasing to the top management. If I hadn't been pregnant, Brian might have been replaced by Steven. His current situation seems to have turned from danger to safety, but in fact it is precarious. Brian took another stack of papers and threw them on my desk. Could it be another cheating photo of me with someone? Brian gnashed his teeth and pointed at the table. Voluntary consent form for gland removal. Explain. The explosion 2 years ago did not cause irreversible damage to my glands. I voluntarily gave up treatment. The hospital said it was confidential, but Brian actually found it out. I pointed to the words on the document and read, voluntary, removal, gland, consent. Anthony, are you kidding me? Are you so cruel as to remove the mark between us just to be angry with me and make me feel guilty? How could that be? I quickly explained. Hurting myself and causing pain to someone I don't love? I don't have that problem, okay? Brian's expression softened a bit, and he raised an eyebrow for me to continue. Because it hurts too much. The gland is more sensitive than the body, so the pain of treatment is 10 times greater. Removal only hurts once, so a short pain is worse than a long one. Just because of this? Brian was confused and incredulous. What else? I don't understand why he made that expression. He already wants me to die for my lover, so why does he still care whether I have a mark or not? Brian laughed at himself, and his expression became disappointed and sad, as if I had abandoned him. Anthony, we have been together for so many years, but you actually gave up the mark I gave you just because you were afraid of the pain. I used to feel guilty for falling in love with someone else, but now I feel that you are not worthy of my love at all, let alone my guilt. You make me sick. What bullshit is he talking about? He has fallen in love with someone else and is playing such a self-deception in front of me. What's the point? Just because it hurts? Have you ever been in pain? I sneered. It's easy to talk without any pain in the waist. If it were me, I would not abandon the mark even if I died. You're really patient then. I waved my hands impatiently to shoo away the flies. Brian was immersed in his own emotions, talking to himself. Sure enough, the pheromone matching is not wrong, Anthony. You really can't compare to Kevin. He can give up everything for me. I propped my chin up and smiled at him. Well, I wish you two will be together forever. 19. Brian's acting was necessary. He recorded a video, and he edited our conversation and posted it online. I became a coward who abandoned his mark just for a little pain. I insulted his true feelings and had an affair with Steven. He was so heartbroken by me that he had no choice but to fall in love with someone else. Brian hugged his lover and kissed him tenderly and gratefully. My Kevin, you are so smart and capable. Humph, I'm the leader of the rebels, so this little trick doesn't matter. Brian scratched his nose and turned to me smugly. Anthony, don't blame me. Steven was the one who started the trouble with me. I was just fighting back. Yeah. I nodded calmly. It is normal for someone who doesn't love you to do anything to hurt you. The gossip created by Brian made Steven and I get criticized badly, but unfortunately neither of us cared. Steven even sent me a message to complain that he was being criticized before he even had the chance to eat. It was too unfair. Even though Brian threw mud at me, it didn't affect my work. My boss even comforted me, saying that the team believed in my ability and character. We had only worked together for 3 years, and they trusted me. But the person I loved for many years thought I was deliberately trying to harm his beloved. Brian and Steven have a complete falling out, and he needs a child even more urgently to consolidate his position. The lover's potion was consumed quickly, and he complained to me that Brian was too clingy. I responded with an envious expression. The little lover's happy voice came. This is all due to the potion you rely on. Don't worry. When I become Mrs. Lee, I won't treat you badly, ha. I didn't reply, but switched to an external IP and sent the potion to my lover. After sending them, I found that my sleeves were bright red and the flowers were growing too well, which had cracked my skin again. When I came out of the shower, there was a sudden message on the communicator, sent by my lover. Can I go get the medicine directly? I squinted my eyes. This was weird. Had I been exposed? 20. Brian's little lover came running into my room. What's the matter? I asked calmly, leaning back in my chair. The lover was scared and stammered. You are the real Kevin, right? You have been leading me to pretend to be Kevin and deceive Brian, right? I sneered. You have such imagination, so you should write the love story. It will definitely be better. The little lover looked out the door fearfully, and Brian pushed the door open with a stern face. I was impatient. What's wrong with you today? Is this a special interest of yours as a couple? I had already thought of a solution for the potion issue, so I wasn't afraid of Brian finding out. But Brian didn't mention the potion. Instead, he played a video clip in which the rebel leader, Kevin, killed his pursuers. Kevin, in the clip, was covered in blood and looked like a half-beast, with soft long ears like a rabbit and sharp claws like a wolf. Others can't get any clues from this mutant, but Brian has seen me lose control and transform into a beast. Finally, the second leader of the rebel army, Mark, challenged with great pride. Brian, you think that weakling is our boss. Are you stupid or blind? This swearing video of Mark did not go viral. It must have been intercepted as soon as it was uploaded. Brian looked at me steadily. You are Kevin? That's why you always appear where Kevin appears? I didn't save the wrong person. Yes, I am Kevin. I always appear where Kevin appears, using my injury to clear myself of suspicion. Brian didn't save the wrong person, because Kevin and I are the same person. 21. Brian suddenly stepped towards me angrily and said, You are Kevin, why didn't you tell me? I stared at him with amusement. You hate me to death. Telling you that I am the leader of the rebels? Am I crazy? I hate you because you lied to me and killed Kevin. If I knew you were Kevin, how could I hate you? Brian knows I'm Kevin, so I can become the person you love again? I didn't know Brian only loves Kevin as a person. Brian was stunned for a moment, then impatiently tried to pull me away. What nonsense. You are Kevin, we are the best match, and I have loved you from the beginning to the end. The best match. I took out a bottle of potion from the drawer and shook it at Brian. Then this is your perfect lover. Artificially synthesized pheromones with a matching rate of up to 99%. That's it. You used this thing to help, lie to me. Brian's expression turned into shame and anger, his eyes full of disgust as he swept over his lover. The little darling, who was at the top of my heart yesterday, is now like a piece of garbage. Brian's love is really universal and cheap. I hid my inner sigh and looked at him with a friendly expression. Yes. I lied to you. I'm so bad. I apologize to you. Anthony, I told you that apologies are useless. Brian snatched the synthetic potion and smashed it out of the window. Brian hates people apologizing the most. After his mother passed away, his father was heartbroken. Brian almost killed his father at the funeral. He yelled like crazy, Can an apology change the damage caused? If you know it will hurt, you shouldn't do it. If you have done it, don't apologize. 22. Brian's anger was transferred to his mistress, and he felt that torturing her would help me relieve my anger. This person stabbed you with a knife, and now you blame the knife, isn't that wrong? The lover's name was Luing, and he was originally a male prostitute in the Imperial Underground Tunnel. Because of his similar body shape to Kevin, the prostitute client asked him to change into the same clothes as Kevin to play with him. While escaping, he bumped into Brian. Brian, who was regretting that his true love died in the fire, saw Luing and was overwhelmed by the joy of regaining what he had lost. In order to get rid of the powerful guest, Luing admitted that she was Kevin. I was too lazy to pay attention to Brian, and he had no choice but to throw the firefly out the door. But Luing was shot as soon as he stepped out of the manor. Because he pretended to be Kevin and confessed to the whole country, he was put on the assassination list by the rebels. Brian wanted to take this opportunity to eliminate his stain and chose to let the rebel group act. If I hadn't pulled him back in time, he would have been beaten to a pulp. Luing burst into tears and threw things at her. You are a guardian and a rebel leader, both of you are big shots. You only want to bully me, am I just part of your play? I quietly reminded him, you were the one who wanted to pretend to be Kevin. You are not innocent. I just wanted to stay out of the spotlight, but it was because of the potion you gave me that I got myself into trouble. But you accepted all of this voluntarily, didn't you? In order to clear myself of suspicion, I provided potions to help Luing impersonate Kevin, but I did not force him. It was his own ambition that led him to fall deeper and deeper into trouble. Luing was obviously feeling guilty, so she just kept making a fuss. Now I'm marked. And I'm being hunted. It's all your fault. As for the marking, go find Brian. I was indeed inconsiderate of you being hunted down. That's inconsiderate. Then tell your people to stop chasing me. My identity has been exposed. If I contact my companions now, the communication code may be deciphered, which will bring disaster to the entire organization. Seeing my hesitation, Luing raised her voice. Don't you even have this ability? I think you are just a name in vain. I dodged and circled behind Luing and clamped my sharp claws like blades around his neck. Don't play tricks on me, little thing. I don't bother to pay attention to you because I don't care. Stop making trouble. Otherwise, You may not live to see the day when everything is over. Lu Ying was so frightened that his body stood stiff. He looked at the half-beast shadow printed on the wall and nodded hurriedly. I let go of him and watched my hands return to normal. I really didn't like looking scary like this. 23. The rebel group's attack on Brian's manor was undoubtedly a direct provocation to the Imperial Guardians. Brian assembled his army and prepared to launch an unprecedented campaign of suppression. Brian grabbed my chin and forced me to look at him. Anthony, as long as you stop dwelling on the unpleasantness before, I can let them go. I made a go-ahead gesture to him. I hate being threatened the most, and he should know that. Despite Brian's tight control, the rebels still managed to slip away right under his nose. I looked out the window at the starry night sky, and the last huge stone pressing on my heart fell to the ground. They no longer needed my protection. Brian pulled my arm angrily. They know all the routes in the capital, and you have been involved in the reconstruction of the capital's roads since college. Anthony, you have already started planning, right? Anthony, why? I impatiently pulled his hand away and turned to wrap a painting on the table. Brian was played by the rebels, making him the biggest joke of the Empire. However, Stephen's approval rating has increased unprecedentedly due to his efforts to eliminate a foreign human trafficking organization, and he has been promoted to the top of the list. This painting is a gift that Stephen asked me for. Brian was furious when he saw Stephen's name on the painting and threw it to the ground, breaking the frame into pieces. Anthony, are you really in love with that vile bastard Stephen? I'm just returning a favor, I said calmly, with no intention of angering Brian at all. Favor? I don't know what favor you can owe him. Brian pulled me into his arms, with a smile in his eyes, but the smile did not reach his eyes. I looked him straight in the eye. 2 years ago, he concealed the fact of my miscarriage from me. Otherwise, I would have been taken back to the lab by Brian's father. Brian was stunned for a moment, and his eyes subconsciously moved to my abdomen. Oh, you don't know yet? 2 years ago, I was pregnant. I was severely burned in order to protect the baby. But the baby I risked my life to protect was miscarried when I couldn't stand the pain of cleaning the wound. Brian let go of me suddenly, and bloodshot eyes filled with pain. Anthony, why didn't you tell me you had a child? If you had told me, when you meet someone more compatible, you will abandon us without hesitation, just like your father did. No, I won't be like him. Yeah, at least your father didn't kill his own children. Brian stepped back in horror. I didn't. I'm not. I thought about telling you, but when you showed up at the hospital again, it was just to show off to me that you had found your true love. I laughed at myself. You were smiling and so happy. Stop talking. Stop talking, Anthony. I don't know, I was deceived by Firefly. The synthetic pheromones on him made me think he was you. There were no synthetic pheromones back then, and everything you did was your true feelings. Firefly is not Kevin, can you really not feel it? Finally, he was exposed. How could he not tell the difference between the leader of the rebel organization and the Firefly in the underground tunnel? Whether it was a substitute or just a sense of novelty, it couldn't change the fact that he betrayed. Brian was speechless and could only look at me blankly. He was deceiving himself and probably still thought he was a passionate person. Now that we've opened up, let me tell you one more thing. I hid from the explosion 2 years ago for the sake of my child. I ran back when I saw you rushing in recklessly. You didn't save me, but I was caught in the explosion because I was looking for you. The color drained from Brian's face and his whole body was shaking like a soul that was about to shatter at any moment. I leaned over to his ear and said, apologizing is useless. So, don't say it. 24. Brian's emotions got out of control, causing his susceptible period to come early. He locked himself in the room and abused himself. Firefly, affected by his pheromones, was attracted to him and had its neck nearly broken. When Lu Ying woke up, she angrily yelled, "What the hell is Brian? I slept with him for 2 years for nothing. Who does he think he is? A stupid idiot." I said helplessly, "Your injury hasn't healed yet, just be quiet. Why are you pretending? You must think I'm cheap, right? I am such a slut and shameless." I don't want to die in the sewer, am I wrong? Omegas are born sluts. But this is not my choice. No. Too many people have their lives changed because of gender differentiation, and Lu Ying is a microcosm of those people. I was the top student in the school, I should have been an alpha. But I became an omega. I was forced to drop out of school because I got into estrus unexpectedly, I was ridiculed and called a slut, my biological parents knocked me out and sold me to an old man. Ha! This world should explode, it's rotten. Lu Ying scratched her arms frantically, leaving bloody scratches. Only after seeing heaven can you understand how desperate hell is. Lu Ying cried loudly, as if the pain that had been suppressed for a long time wanted to be released at this moment. After venting her emotions, Lu Ying stared at the ceiling. Without the potion, Brian looks at me like shit. Tell me, without pheromones, does love still exist? I thought of my parents and told him seriously, of course it happened. I was just unlucky to meet Brian. Ha! Yes, Brian is the bastard who was fooled by the synthetic potion. Seriously, how about you consider supporting me? Lu Ying came close to me seriously. When I saw you for the first time, I wanted to say that you are really good-looking, gentle and scheming, exactly my type. Anyway, you have that thing down there, why don't you try it with me? If you're alright, I'll go get busy. Don't go. Firefly, who was about to get closer, was nearly hit by the vase. Brian's eyes turned red and he released a frenzied pressure. Who allowed you to touch him? 25. Brian smashed the firefly to the ground, and the firefly shrank back in pain. Don't kill me, don't kill me. I stopped Brian and he looked at me in disbelief. You want to protect him? I ignored him and helped Lu Ying up. Brian stopped me and handed me a bouquet of flowers. I promised to give you a bouquet of roses every morning. He held the flowers stubbornly, with bloody bite marks on his arm. The bouquet was still covered with dew, but it wasn't actually a rose, but a parasitic flower called Rayborn, which I had carefully cultivated in my garden for 2 years. I didn't take the flower and looked at him coldly. Brian, is this meaningful? Brian held the bouquet with red eyes. If you do this to me, I will destroy the air purifier. He was like an angry child, yelling and overturning the chessboard if he was not allowed to win. Can you? I asked nonchalantly. It was a project that benefited the people. If he stopped the work, naturally Stephen, who wanted to gain public support, would take over. Brian was no longer the only one in the Lee family, so he was nothing to be afraid of. Anthony, at least you can't do this to me today. Brian's voice was filled with tears. Today? Oh, it turns out it's our wedding anniversary. Brian must be feeling pain just breathing right now, but it will be fine soon. On my wedding anniversary, I received a pornographic video of my partner having sex with someone else. Am I just numb now? What did Brian say? It's just an anniversary, but I'm going to die? Brian dropped his hand, and the flower fell to the ground and shattered. I read until late at night. This is the new work of my favorite author. The teacher's work is very wonderful, but it is too thick. When I woke up, I saw Brian, sitting on the edge of the bed, covered in bruises. His shirt was stained with blood, and his face was pale, but he didn't make a sound and didn't disturb my sweet dream. Seeing that I woke up, Brian forced a smile. Anthony, so you were in so much pain at that time. How can I make you forgive me? How can I make you forgive me? Before he could finish his words, Brian covered his face and burst into tears. There were 2 bloody scars on the back of his neck. In order to repay me, he hurts himself every day, but he doesn't feel sorry at all for self-harming in front of people who don't care about you, and even thinks this behavior is childish and ridiculous. When Brian burned himself, the doctor thought he was crazy and reported it to Brian's father. Brian's father wanted to take me back, and Brian had a conflict with the people sent by Brian's father. Don't worry, Anthony, I will never let anyone hurt you again. Brian hugged me, but his gentle words made me want to vomit. Brian broke up with Brian's father, and Stephen, who was in the limelight, suddenly assassinated Brian's father and became a wanted fugitive. 26. Kevin. Anthony, help me. Help me. I heard Lu Ying's screams, and when I went downstairs, I saw Brian strangling his neck and Lu Ying's face turned blue. I snatched the firefly away, and Brian fell to the ground, his body covered in blood from wounds that had not yet healed, and his whole body looked like it was broken into pieces and put together again. Brian's eyes were red, and he complained aggrievedly, "Anthony, it was this bitch, he drugged me again." Luing was still holding the broken glass bottle of potion. He forced himself to stare at Brian, not noticing that his hand was pierced. "You're talking nonsense. You framed me. Who do you think you are to frame you? If I hadn't recognized the wrong person, I wouldn't even look at you. Anthony, get this bitch out. Get her out." Brian stretched out his hand to me. His face was pale and his hands were full of wounds from biting his desires, like a wronged victim. Luing closed her eyes as if accepting her fate. I ducked away from Brian's hand. "Brian, I'm not a child. How could an S-level alpha not be able to avoid fireflies? Do you believe me?" Luing opened her eyes, tears streaming down her face, looking extremely ugly. "Princess, I'm here to elope with you." Stephen's voice suddenly came from all the communication equipment in the manor. It was deafening, mixed with the bodyguards shouting and the sounds of fighting. Brian grabbed my wrist with bloodshot eyes and said, "Don't leave. I don't want to hurt you. Anthony, you listen to me." Although he said he didn't want to hurt me, he still released his pressure on me. Luing whimpered and curled up. The mark urged him to go into heat, and the pressure made him suffer. My body was also heating up, but every cell in my body was clamoring for me to break Brian's neck. After the gland was removed, I noticed the changes in my body. "Anthony, your background is a taboo. Now Stephen is a wanted criminal. Can he protect you?" Brian pretended to be concerned about me. I tentatively pointed a finger at Brian. "Kneel down." As these two words came out, Brian's knees slammed uncontrollably to the ground. He looked up at me in shock. "Anthony, how could you? Not only do I have no glands, I may even become an alpha. Am I worthy of Brian's love right now?" "Alpha?" Brian shook his head in disbelief. "Impossible. How could it be? With a different name, identity, and gender, his love becomes different. Brian's love is nothing special." I walked around Brian, dragged the almost insane firefly away, and stuffed a test tube filled with blood-red liquid into his hand. "This can dry up your glands painlessly. Now you have a choice." Brian looked at the tube of liquid, as if he realized something, with a look of horror on his face. "Anthony, what is that? What do you want to do?" I jumped out of the window without looking back. Stephen was badly injured, and his always neat clothes were now torn and covered in blood. When he saw me, his eyes lit up. "Anthony." He was distracted for a moment and was nearly stabbed in the chest by the bodyguard's knife. I closed my eyes, raised my hand and waved it, and the bodyguard flew out and was knocked unconscious. Putting my hand down, I was speechless. "Are you going to elope or are you here to commit suicide?" Stephen covered his chest. "Anthony, are you Alpha?" "Alpha and Alpha are born enemies." 27. "It's over. Anthony, even though you have the aura of an Alpha, I still think you are so handsome. Is there something wrong with me?" Stephen's face flushed, and he looked at me, holding his chest. His expression made me subconsciously dodge, and a sharp blade appeared in my hand, cutting the hand that Stephen extended to me. "You don't mind my identity?" "My identity, the leader of a rebel organization, a mutant Omega, a forbidden child, and a monster that is still evolving." Stephen held my hand, which had turned into a claw, and kissed the back of my hand gently, allowing his hand to be cut more. "Old Man Lee is dead. No one knows your secret anymore. You are free. Do you like snow? Or do you like sunshine and beaches? I can accompany you to any place you want to go." Stephen had been planning for years and victory was in sight, but when he was about to achieve his goal, he assassinated Brian's father. Although he had clearly given up his plan of many years, he looked relaxed and did not show any regrets. "I want to check out the central air purification system first. I'll think about the rest later." Stephen stepped on the accelerator and the car sped out. The warm breeze blew gently, and it felt like we were not on an escape, but returning home at the end of a picnic in the pleasant sunset. I suddenly became curious. What does Stephen's home look like? Is your house full of teddy bears? I asked. How do you know? Of course not. He said stubbornly, but his ears turned red. I couldn't help but find him kind of cute. I have a PhD in psychology, don't try to lie to me. Actually, it was because I had seen the cartoon bear hanging on the key of his luxury car, and the stitches he used to sew the bear were exactly the same as the ones he used to sew his own wounds. Yes, I know you are a top student. Even though you are an Omega, you never admit defeat and end up hurting yourself. At the time, I was thinking that if you were my Omega, I would never let you suffer so much, but you don't need anyone's protection. You are like a blue rose covered in frost. No matter how harsh the wind and snow are, they can't stop you from blooming. I looked at Stephen in surprise. Brian thought I was a mutant with special talents. Little did he know that every time I worked side by side with him, I had to work dozens of times harder. I thought I had concealed my embarrassment well. Stephen's voice became smaller. You don't like teddy bears, so I like it. I turned to the window and the scenery kept passing by. Stephen sat on the soft carpet sewing a doll, and the warm light of dusk softened his outline. This picture was quite desirable. Stephen started humming a song, and as if I was infected by him, my mood also improved. The pager beeped. It was Brian calling. Do you want to connect, let him witness our sweetness, and then kill him? Stephen smiled mischievously. Why would you bother with such an insignificant person? Stephen's eyes lit up, his eyebrows curved, and he looked particularly handsome. Yes, he is irrelevant, we will ignore him. 20. The air purification device was designed to look like a giant tree. Clean air was transported to all locations along its branches, and even the Imperial Sewer area was no longer gray. Children were running around and playing under the tree, creating a peaceful atmosphere. These children playing together will soon be tested for gender differentiation. They will be divided into Alpha, Beta, and Omega, and the levels will be clear from then on. Even if they don't like it or don't want to, their lives are destined and they have no choice. Stephen looked at the air purification device that looked like a giant tree and was very excited. That's great. Anthony, what you are doing is great. I nodded. I want to eat ice cream. I'll buy it for you. Good. Stephen turned around happily, but was stopped by me again. He looked at me puzzledly. I smiled and waved. It's okay. Go ahead. After he left, I stepped into the elevator and went straight to the top floor of the air purification unit to do one last thing. The seeds of the reborn parasitic flower mature every 2 years. Once the seeds enter the host's body, it only takes 3 Kevins to mutate the host's flesh and blood into its own nutrients. The parasitic flowers nourished by the flesh and blood of a second-generation mutant like me can also produce toxins that can permanently put the glands dormant. This is the secret that the Lee family discovered through experiments on my parents and then destroyed forever by them. But all of this has been passed down to me through cell memory. During their escape, the parents met many people with the same experience, not only Omegas, but also gentle Alphas who were sent to the battlefield to kill excellent Betas who were not recognized. Too many people were trapped in the predetermined life and suffered. Even if they defeated 5 perpetrators, they could only save 1 person. If you want to change, the only way is to end it. And I don't know when the animal genes hidden in my body will completely devour my humanity. Instead of living like that, it's better to... But the books I didn't finish reading, the people I didn't have time to love. After all, it's a bit of a pity. 29. Stephen bought an ice cream and saw Brian stumbling towards him, looking as miserable as a stray dog. Stephen stopped him. Brother, Anthony doesn't want you anymore. It will be embarrassing if you keep pestering him. Brian's eyes were bloodshot, and the pressure he brought made Stephen feel as if a heavy weight had fallen on his shoulders, and his breathing became heavy. Brian grabbed him, like a life-saving straw, and said in a hoarse and trembling voice, Anthony's blood can make the gland dormant forever. He wants it. Stephen realized what was happening and dropped the ice cream in his hand to the ground. The moment he turned around, he saw bloody flowers blooming on the crown of the tree. Then, Stephen felt his body suddenly lighten, and the pressure from the S-level alpha disappeared. Brian knelt on the ground exhausted, howling in despair like a wild animal. That day, the sky above the Empire was shrouded in blood mist, and everyone's pheromones disappeared. The era of Alpha, Beta, and Omega has come to an end. 30. Lu Ying sat on a bench under the giant tree, reading a book and talking to herself. Stephen destroyed the Li family and started his own company. He is doing well. He travels around whenever he has time. He said that you are such a good liar, you must be hiding. He said with full confidence that he will find you. You are so generous. You left so much money to help us. I will consider you to be my supporter for the rest of my life. But the book you left behind is so difficult to read. I have to study harder. I went back to school and became a classmate of your stupid second-in-command. He always had a lot to say about you. He said you were so cool when you beat down 5 alphas to save him. He was so noisy. And Brian, when he was kicked out of the Li family manor, he went crazy and snatched your pillow and secretly saved a strand of your hair. Now he is shamelessly working hard to make money and desperately wants to clone you. This idiot still doesn't understand. But don't worry, I secretly replaced his wool, so he won't disgust you. Anthony, you must be riding the wind of freedom and traveling around the world now, right?